that celebrations are magnificent, at the heart of the pageantry is a simple message: service.
When Camilla's daughter threw shade at Princess Anne, nobody saw the storm that Prince William was about to unleash. Buckingham Palace might look polished on the outside, but behind those grand walls, tradition often collides with raw family tension. And sometimes, the drama slips right into the spotlight, with no royal rule strong enough to cover it up. What started off as a calm public appearance quickly twisted into the exact kind of chaos the royals fear the most. An explosive scandal with their own bloodline. The drama kicked off with Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter, when she dropped a sharp remark at Princess Anne that stung way more than anyone imagined. Laura has always been kept on the sidelines of royal life, never crowned with titles or paraded around like William, Kate, or Anne. She isn't wrapped up in the constant spotlight. They live center stage while she's pushed to the edges. Instead, Laura moves through life on her own terms, working as an art curator and raising her 3 kids far from the royal glare. Still, Laura can never fully step out of the royal orbit. Her mother's marriage to King Charles locked her into that world whether she likes it or not. Even her kids were pulled into the spotlight at Charles's coronation, taking on roles that placed them front and center. So when Laura walks into royal spaces, every word she speaks lands heavier than she probably realizes. The moment that lit the fire came at Windsor Castle during a grand event honoring one of Princess Anne's endless charity milestones. Anne, who the public praises for her non-stop dedication, had just hit her jaw-dropping 20,000th engagement. That staggering record only cemented her reputation as the hardest-working royal alive, and the pride in the room was undeniable until Laura's remark turned heads. Princess Anne isn't called the hardest-working royal for nothing. Her record speaks loud and clear. She's tied to more than 300 charities and clocks in more events than anyone else wearing a crown. The Windsor Castle reception pulled in close family, top royals, and a select list of guests. It was supposed to be a proud celebration of Anne's decades of service, her tireless work with Save the Children, her countless overseas trips, and her iron dedication to duty. Prince William showed up too, standing strong in support of his aunt. His respect for Anne runs deep. He sees her straight shooting style and unshakable commitment as the backbone that has kept the monarchy steady through some of its wildest storms. To William, Princess Anne was the living definition of duty, pure, unshaken, and relentless. As a boy, he admired her fearlessness while she competed in equestrian events, and as a grown man, he often leaned on her example when the weight of the crown started pressing down on him. On this day, though, he expected only respect and admiration to flow her way. But instead, what he got was a shocking blow. Laura, who had only scored an invite thanks to her mother's influence, found herself mingling in a small circle of guests when she suddenly dropped her remark. Witnesses claim she said Anne's old-fashioned style of duty felt out of step with modern Britain. She hinted that younger royals like William and Kate were bringing in fresh energy, suggesting Anne's entire way of working was stuck in another era. The comment came out casually, almost like small talk, but the sting was sharp, and everyone nearby felt it. If anyone else had dared to say it, maybe it could have been brushed aside. But coming from Camilla's daughter, that made it explosive. But Anne isn't your average royal. She's devoted her entire life to service, caring little for fashion, fame, or fanfare. She doesn't chase applause, and she never indulges in flashy displays. So to throw shade at her, even subtly, was like striking at the core of who she is. Some guests froze, unsure where to look, while others tried to glance away, hoping the moment would just disappear. But William, he caught every single word. The prince's reaction was instant. William is known for staying cool in public, keeping his tone measured, and handling tension without making waves. But beneath that calm lies a loyalty that burns fiercely for those he loves, and Anne has always been one of those anchors in his life. The tension ratcheted up even further because Anne herself was right there, within earshot, witnessing every bite of the insult. Anne didn't flare up. She kept the stoic, composed front everyone knows so well. But if you knew her, you could see the tiniest clues: a lip tightening, a subtle hardening in her stance. She's faced criticism all her life, from being overshadowed by her brothers to scrutiny over her personal choices. But hearing this jab from inside the family, in public, hit differently. it stung deeper. For William, the comment was completely unacceptable. He saw before him a woman who had weathered storms far fiercer than anything Laura had ever known, a royal who defended the crown through battles he could barely imagine. And in that moment, his protective instinct surged. This was not just a remark, it was an attack on one of his strongest pillars. William couldn't just stand there, letting someone with no royal role throw shade at Anne in front of everyone, but he also knew the risk of a public showdown. He'd grown up seeing how a single unguarded moment could explode in headlines and shape the story for weeks. Still, his anger was impossible to miss. Clenched fists, a piercing glare, and the way he stepped toward Laura made it crystal clear. This wasn't going to slide. The tension hit the room instantly. Conversations froze mid-sentence, and every eye felt the charge in the air. Something big was about to go down. Champagne glasses sat untouched, while eyes darted nervously between William and Laura. This was the exact kind of moment the palace fears. Family tension exposed for everyone to see. And even though William didn't shout, the silence after Laura's words screamed his anger louder than any outburst ever could. Anne, always the pragmatist, tried to steer the night back on track. She smoothly shifted the focus to her decades of work, sharing stories from her early Save the Children trips and giving thanks to those who had supported her along the way. But beneath the polite conversation, the undercurrent of drama lingered. Everyone could feel it crackling in the air. It was Anne's way of calming the room, but the tension didn't disappear. William stayed right by her side, protective instincts on high alert, determined that this insult wouldn't just slide under the rug. That night at Windsor Castle, his anger became its own story, a signal that cracks in the royal family were far from patched. But this was just the start. The next morning, William requested a private meeting with Anne. He had spent hours replaying the incident, every thought sharpening his resolve to defend her. William isn't one to seek drama for drama's sake, but when someone he cares about is hurt, he moves fast. Anne, ever composed, wasn't shocked. She knew exactly where this was heading. Anne knew her nephew well enough to sense he wouldn't let this slide. When they met in her private sitting room at Gatcombe Park, the Princess Royal stayed as composed as ever. She listened quietly, while William's frustration spilled out in sharp, clipped sentences. He couldn't understand how Laura, who owed her place entirely to her mother's marriage to Charles, had the audacity to criticize someone who had worked harder than almost anyone in the royal family. Anne, true to form, just gave a small shrug, letting the words roll off her shoulders. She had faced criticism all her life and knew that some comments weren't worth a fight. But William's protective energy made it clear this wasn't over. "You get used to it, William," Anne said coolly. "People always think they know how this job should be done." To her, Laura's remark was just another jab in a long line of dismissals she'd endured over the years. But William wasn't having it. His respect for Anne ran too deep to let what he saw as blatant disrespect slide. He pressed his aunt, insisting the family couldn't ignore behavior like that, especially from someone inside the inner circle. He reminded her of all the sacrifices she had made, missed holidays, grueling tours overseas, and endless back-to-back engagements that rarely grabbed headlines, but quietly, they built the monarchy's reputation and strength over decades. For William, letting Laura's words go unanswered felt like dishonoring everything Anne had built. Anne appreciated his loyalty, but she urged caution. She knew from experience that reacting only gave careless remarks more power. William, however, saw things differently. He had grown up knowing that every whisper could explode onto tomorrow's front page. He worried that if Laura's comments spread, it could be twisted into a story about a generational rift within the monarchy, a narrative the press would devour instantly. To him, staying silent wasn't strength, it was a risk. And by now, word of the tense encounter had already made its way back to Camilla, setting the stage for even more drama. The news reached the Queen Consort quickly. Laura had always been off-limits for public criticism. She wasn't a working royal, and Camilla had worked hard to keep her and her son, Tom Parker Bowles, shielded from palace politics. She wanted them to live without the relentless scrutiny William and Harry had faced since birth. But Camilla also knew her daughter could speak her mind, and sometimes that caused trouble. When Camilla caught wind of William's visible anger, she bristled instantly. To her, it looked like an overreaction that could stir up tension unnecessarily. And suddenly, Charles found himself in a tricky spot, trying to balance family loyalty with keeping the palace calm. As king, Charles had the weighty duty of keeping the family united. But as a father and husband, he also understood Camilla's fierce protective instincts. He had worked hard to bring his second family into the fold, making sure Laura and Tom were quietly accepted, even if titles would never be theirs. Now, a single remark threatened to tip that fragile balance. For William, this wasn't just about Laura, it was about defending Anne, and by extension, showing respect for the crown itself. Their conversation ended with Anne advising him to let it go, but William's mind was already racing, refusing to bury what he saw as a blatant insult. But William wasn't ready to let it slide. He felt the situation demanded acknowledgement, if not directly from Laura, then at least from Camilla. That resolve set the stage for an even deeper rift within the family. William began subtly pulling away, avoiding joint appearances whenever he could and keeping conversations short and formal. Palace insiders quickly noticed the chill. For years, William had kept his feelings toward his stepmother private, maintaining a polite but cautious relationship. This incident, however, added a new layer of frost, one so sharp that even seasoned courtiers couldn't ignore it. To outsiders, everything looked perfect, but inside the palace, the atmosphere was tense. William stayed furious, Anne remained composed, and Camilla kept her guard up. Slowly, the mood in the royal family shifted. Even informal gatherings became cautious affairs, with courtiers subtly moving seating arrangements to keep William and Laura apart. Charles tried to smooth things over, reminding William that Laura hadn't meant her words to be malicious. But William stood his ground. For him, intent didn't matter as much as impact, and the impact on Anne was written all over his eyes. This tension revealed just how fragile the relationships within the royal family had become, and Charles, stuck in the middle, faced another test in keeping the family together, a family often defined by its divisions. The drama was far from over. Had Anne handled it alone, the issue might have faded quietly, but William wasn't about to let it slide. Soon, the tension began to ripple through the family, with the first visible sign showing up at a charity gala at Clarence House, packed with familiar faces from the worlds of art and culture. And of course, Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter, was there too, right in the centre of it all. As a seasoned art curator, Laura was at home in events like this, confident, stylish, and charming when talking about her work. She knew how to own the room, but the moment William walked in with Catherine, everything changed. People could feel it. Something in the air had shifted. Most guests didn't know why, but the tension was undeniable. Laura, seemingly unfazed, kept her composure. She spoke animatedly about an upcoming exhibition she was organising, laughed easily with family friends, and posed gracefully for photos. Yet beneath her calm, the undercurrent of drama buzzed. Everyone could sense that something bigger was simmering just beneath the surface. Yet William kept his distance, his face showing none of the usual warmth he displayed at public events. Catherine, ever sharp and aware, tried to smooth things over with polite conversation with Camilla, but even her calm presence couldn't fully erase the tension in the room. Then, Laura and William finally crossed paths. What should have been a simple, polite exchange instantly became a pointed reminder of the divide between them. Those close enough to hear said William gave a stiff, measured greeting, while Laura, with a hint of defiance, shot back that she hoped everyone could keep perspective about a past matter, her tone cool but deliberate, sending a clear signal that the tension was far from over. To Laura, the whole issue was blown way out of proportion. She didn't see herself as seriously insulting Anne, but to William, her refusal to acknowledge the hurt only confirmed what he already believed. She lacked respect. Camilla noticed the tension immediately. She stepped in, guiding Laura away with a protective arm and offering a smile that barely hid her irritation. For Camilla, it felt completely unfair. Her daughter, who had never chosen life in the royal spotlight, was now being judged by standards she never agreed to, and the pressure of the palace world was closing in fast. Camilla whispered to Laura to just let it go, but Laura's pride was already on the line. Anne, true to form, stayed composed, spending most of the evening chatting with donors and encouraging younger royals. Yet Catherine later remarked to friends that Anne's shoulders looked heavier than usual, as if she carried not just the family's duties, but the weight of being at the centre of this unwanted drama. In the days that followed, new complications surfaced. Palace staff, often the silent witnesses to royal dynamics, started talking, and whispers began to spread, hinting that this tension wasn't going away anytime soon. Whispers about William's visible disapproval, Laura's sharp remark, and Camilla's protective reaction started circulating through the palace corridors. While the public had no clue, inside, the monarchy's private world was buzzing with speculation. The very risk William had feared, a single careless comment turning into a story about division, was creeping closer by the hour. Sensing the growing fracture, Charles decided to act. He called for a private family meeting at Buckingham Palace, hoping to address the tension before it spiraled further out of control. Charles wanted to get things straight before the situation spun out of control. Gathered in a small drawing room, away from the grandeur of the state chambers, the family sat in tense silence. William, Anne, Camilla, and Laura were all there, quietly joined by Catherine, who tried to act as a calming presence. Charles began carefully, choosing his words with precision. He reminded everyone that unity was the family's strongest shield, and that maintaining it meant addressing this tension before it could do any real damage. He spoke about the monarchy's delicate position in modern Britain, warning that even private slights could damage confidence if they ever reached the public eye. His tone was calm, but his eyes revealed real concern. William was the first to speak, his voice firm and unwavering. He stated that Laura's remark about Anne had crossed a line. He spoke with conviction, highlighting his aunt's decades of tireless, selfless work and expressing just how much he admired her. Every person in the room felt the weight of his words. Everyone knew how deeply William respected Anne's example. But Laura didn't back down, meeting his stance with quiet defiance. Laura insisted she hadn't meant to offend anyone and claimed her words were blown out of proportion. She explained that she had been speaking casually, not aiming for a personal attack. To her, it was baffling that a single remark could stir up so much drama. Anne stepped in, trying to restore balance. She acknowledged that the comment had a sting, but urged everyone to keep things from escalating further. Her voice stayed steady, showing the same resilience she had demonstrated throughout her life. Yet even her calm presence couldn't fully erase the charged tension hanging over the room. Camilla finally spoke, her voice sharp with frustration. She reminded William that her children had purposely stayed away from public roles to avoid exactly this kind of scrutiny. She argued that dragging Laura into palace disputes was unfair, especially since Laura had her own life and career outside the monarchy. But William didn't back down. He insisted that once words were spoken within the family, they carried weight, titles or no titles. The meeting wrapped up without a full resolution. Charles urged calm and reconciliation, but even he couldn't force agreement. Anne left quietly, as she always did, returning to her work with the steady determination that defined her. William departed still dissatisfied, feeling his point had gone unheard. Laura and Camilla left feeling protective and defensive, convinced Laura had been unfairly targeted. What remained after the meeting was a subtle but undeniable divide. To the public, there were smiles and ceremonies, but behind the palace walls, trust had frayed. For William, this was no longer just a minor conflict. It had become a matter of principle. For Camilla and Laura, it was about protecting their family's dignity. For Anne, it was just another burden she carried silently as she pushed forward with her duties. The seeds of conflict had been planted, and though invisible to outsiders, they were starting to take root in the private soil of the monarchy. What came next would put the family to an even tougher test. Weeks passed, and the disagreement between William and Laura didn't fade. It grew into an unspoken barrier at every family gathering. On the surface, everything looked polished. Smiles for the cameras, firm handshakes, and speeches delivered with practiced formality. But beneath the veneer, the tension lingered, and everyone in the household could feel it, even if no one dared speak aloud. William couldn't shake the feeling that Anne had been treated unfairly. His admiration for her went far beyond family loyalty. He saw her as the true embodiment of duty. Anne's decades of service, carried out quietly and without craving attention, had always impressed him. Unlike others who sometimes sought recognition, she worked because it was expected, because she believed in it. To William, dismissing her efforts with a careless remark wasn't just rude, it was an insult to everything the monarchy represented. Anne herself tried to move on without drama. She kept up with her engagements, met with charities, and spent long, peaceful hours with her horses at Gatcombe Park, holding her composure as always. If Anne felt the sting of Laura's words, she didn't show it openly, but those who knew her best noticed subtle signs: a firmer set to her jaw, a slightly shorter tone in private conversations, and a tendency to leave gatherings earlier than usual. Nothing dramatic, but enough to show that the remark had cut deeper than she admitted. Meanwhile, Laura stood her ground, convinced she had been misunderstood and unfairly judged. Her life had always been carefully kept outside the royal spotlight, yet somehow she was now caught in its politics. At exhibitions and cultural events, whispers about her tension with William began to circulate. Friends asked delicate questions, and while she brushed them off, the awkwardness and embarrassment were impossible to ignore. For someone who had built a career in art and curation, not family drama, this was an unwelcome shadow. Camilla grew more protective by the day. As queen consort, she had worked hard to find her place within the royal structure, balancing her public role with her loyalty to her children. Seeing Laura caught in this storm triggered a fierce instinct to shield her daughter from criticism. Camilla often confided in Charles, reminding him that neither Laura nor Tom had ever asked to be part of palace politics. Charles listened carefully, but he also understood William's point of view. He knew how much Anne meant to his son and why William felt compelled to defend her. This left Charles in the tricky position of mediator, trying to keep the family from tearing itself apart. Charles invited William to Windsor Castle one afternoon for a private chat over tea. He reminded his son that true leadership required both firmness and flexibility. Charles praised William's loyalty to Anne, but urged him to consider whether pushing the issue further might only deepen family divisions. William listened respectfully, but his jaw tightened as his father spoke. He valued Charles's advice, yet he wasn't convinced that staying silent was the right move. In the weeks that followed, small efforts were made to bridge the gap. Catherine stepped in, inviting Laura to gallery viewings and charity dinners, trying to create moments where reconciliation could take root and ease the tension simmering beneath the surface. Anne, ever pragmatic, agreed to attend events where Laura would be present, showing no outward sign of hurt. But beneath the polished surface, the lines had already been drawn. William's cool distance toward Laura lingered, and her pride kept her from giving the acknowledgement he wanted. The public, as always, remained completely unaware. They saw the royal family carrying out duties and presenting a united front. But palace staff knew the truth. Seating charts were carefully plotted, schedules subtly tweaked, and briefings meticulously planned to prevent any unwanted clashes. Every small detail was a reminder of the tension quietly simmering behind the palace walls. The polished image of the monarchy was maintained, but it came at the cost of constant quiet adjustments behind the scenes. The bigger question lingered. If Laura's remark could stir such a reaction, what did it reveal about the fragile ties holding the family together? William's anger made clear just how fiercely he protected Anne, while Camilla's defense of Laura highlighted the challenges of blending two families into one. For Anne, it was another chapter in a life defined by service and endurance, where even within her own family, her dedication sometimes went unrecognized. In the end, there was no grand resolution, no public apologies, no dramatic reconciliations, just tension simmering quietly beneath the surface. Instead, the situation settled into an uneasy truce. William stayed close to Anne, guarding her with the same fierce loyalty that had first pushed him to act. Laura kept focusing on her art career, steering clear of family politics, but she knew her relationship with William would never be fully repaired. Camilla stayed protective, Charles remained the careful peacemaker, and Anne carried on as she always did, steady, composed, and unshakable. What began as a passing remark had grown into something much larger, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they symbolized: respect, loyalty, pride, and the delicate balance of a family always under the watchful eye of the world. And while the cameras never caught the tension, those inside the palace knew that one evening's comment had left a mark that wouldn't easily fade. So, what do you think? Was William right to hold firm? Or should he have let it pass like Anne suggested? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more, and check out the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.